The snow fell silently on Hollow Creek Valley just as it had for the past 100 winters. In the old wooden house at the valley's heart, 12-year-old Esther watched the flakes dance past her bedroom window. Her younger brother Thomas sat. Beside her on the narrow bed, both of them dressed in their Sunday clothes despite it being only Wednesday. Their grandmother had called them to dress properly for an important conversation. At 8 years old, Thomas didn't understand the weight in grandmother's voice, but Esther felt it like a stone in her stomach. The Whitmore family had lived in this isolated valley since the 1800s. Cut off from the outside world by treacherous mountain passes, they had developed their own ways, their own rules, their own dark traditions that the outside world would never understand or accept. Grandmother Sarah sat in her rocking chair by the fireplace, her weathered hands folded in her lap. The flames cast dancing shadows across her deeply lined face. She had raised Esther and Thomas since their parents died of fever 3 winters ago. "Children," she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been questioned. "You're growing up now. It's time you learned about your future." Esther's heart began to race. She had noticed things lately, the way the older women in their small community looked at her and Thomas when they walked together, the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room, the way grandmother had been teaching her more about cooking and keeping house, while Thomas learned farming and carpentry from the men. "In our family, in our community, we keep our blood pure," grandmother continued. "We don't marry outsiders. We don't let strangers pollute our lineage." Thomas fidgeted beside Esther, kicking his legs against the bed frame. He was still young enough to be more interested in the snow outside than adult talk. "Esther, when you turn 16, you and Thomas will be married. It's been decided since you were born. It's our way. It's always been our way." The words hit Esther like a physical blow. She had suspected this moment would come, had heard whispers about other families in the valley, but hearing it spoken aloud made it terrifyingly real. "But grandmother," Esther's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Thomas is my brother," grandmother's eyes hardened. "He is your intended husband, just as I married my brother Jacob, and my mother married her brother before that. This is how we preserve our family's strength, how we keep outsiders from corrupting what we've built here." Thomas looked up then, confusion clear on his young face. "What does married mean?" he asked innocently. Esther's chest tightened. Her little brother, with his gap-toothed smile and muddy knees, didn't even understand what was being planned for them. To him, marriage was just another grown-up word he didn't need to worry about yet. "It means you'll take care of each other, forever," grandmother said, her voice softening slightly when she looked at Thomas. "Just like you do now, but differently." That night, after Thomas had fallen asleep, Esther sat by her window and stared out at the snow-covered valley. 4 years. She had 4 years before her childhood ended and this nightmare began. She thought about the few books they had in the house, stories of princesses who married handsome strangers, of adventures in far-off lands. She had always assumed those were just fairy tales, but now she wondered if there was a whole world beyond their valley where brothers and sisters lived normal lives. Over the following months, Esther began to pay closer attention to their isolated community. She counted the families and noticed the similarities, the way certain features appeared again and again, the way some of the children seemed slow or sickly, the way adults spoke in whispers about babies who didn't make it through their first winter. She started asking careful questions of the older women, pretending innocent curiosity about family history. Slowly, a horrifying picture emerged. Generations of forced marriages between siblings and cousins, children born with problems that no one spoke about directly. Families where the line between parent, aunt, uncle, and grandparent had blurred beyond recognition. As Thomas grew older and began to understand more about what marriage meant, Esther watched the confusion and discomfort grow in his eyes too. By the time he turned 10, he had stopped climbing into her bed during thunderstorms. He seemed to sense that something had changed between them, even if he couldn't name it. The winter Esther turned 15, a terrible storm blocked the mountain, passes for 3 solid months. During those long, dark days, she made a decision that would change everything. She began teaching Thomas to read better, using their few books. She told him stories about the outside world, about places where families were different, where brothers and sisters loved each other, but didn't marry each other. "Do you want to marry me, Thomas?" she asked him one evening as they sat by the fire. Thomas, now 11 and beginning to understand the adult world better, was quiet for a long time. Finally, he shook his head. "It feels wrong," he whispered. "You're my sister. I love you, but not like that." "Then we won't," Esther said firmly. "We'll find another way." When spring finally came and the passes cleared, Esther put her plan into action. She had spent the winter preparing, learning everything she could about the outside world from their few books and maps. She convinced Thomas that they needed to leave to find help from the authorities in the distant town. The night before her 16th birthday, when grandmother was preparing for the wedding ceremony the next day, Esther and Thomas slipped away into the darkness. They walked for 2 days, following deer paths and stream beds, carrying only a small bag of food and their warmest clothes. When they finally reached the main road, a kind truck driver found them and took them to the nearest town. The authorities were horrified by their story. Social workers took them into protective custody, and an investigation was launched into Hollow Creek Valley. What they found shocked even experienced officials used to dealing with family abuse. Years later, Esther and Thomas lived in different foster homes in the same city. They remained close siblings who loved and protected each other, but in a healthy, normal way. Esther became a social worker herself, dedicated to helping other children escape harmful situations. Thomas studied medicine, driven by memories of the sickly children in their old community. On quiet evenings, they sometimes sat together and remembered the good parts of their childhood, building snow forts, helping with the harvest, the way. Their grandmother told stories by the fire before they understood the darkness beneath the surface. They had broken a cycle that had lasted for generations. In Hollow Creek Valley, other families began to question the old ways, too. Slowly, with help from outside authorities and social services, the community began to heal and change. The snow still falls on Hollow Creek Valley each winter. But now, the children who watch it through their windows do so with hope for futures they can choose for themselves. The dark tradition that had bound families for generations was finally broken, not by force, but by the courage of 2 children who dared to imagine something better. Love, they learned, doesn't mean possession or control. True love means wanting someone to be free and happy, even if that means letting them choose their own path.